all around the island. So they are primarily at the settlements, the main settlements, Castries, Roselay, Viewfort, Ancillary Canneries, the area of land that makes up at the water's edge that makes up the settlement. Currently there are no Queen's Chain in that area, in those areas.
Mm-hmm. So, because I always, in my understanding, my thought was that the Queen's Chain solely referred to beaches.
No, so that's a misconception. The beaches are not part of the Queen's Chain. They're actually part of what we call the foreshore. And so the Queen's Chain is measured from where in some terms it said where the waves cease to have effect. In other words, where the vegetation starts from the beach going inland. So the beach is not part of the Queen's Chain.
So how does the Queen's Chain differ to Crown lands?
Okay, by virtue of the fact that it's called Queen's Chain, it is Crown property. And so it is a particular type of Crown property or Crown land. It is registered and identified as such because it has that peculiarity of its location.
So we sell Crown lands?
Yes.
Can we sell Queen's Chain?
It's not the convention to sell the Queen's Chain, although I might add that I have not come across any piece of legislation that expressly says that it cannot be sold. However, it is policy of our department from time immemorial to always recommend the non-sale of Queen's Chain.
Why is that?
Because we believe that it is part of the state's assets, and it continues to have tremendous benefits for the national good, the public at large, and that the state can benefit from continuing to maintain ownership of those lands. We believe that if you sell, once you've sold something, you've essentially cut your ties to it.
Absolutely no ownership.
Yeah, you would have you would not continue to have any ownership of it if you sell it. And so you probably, in that context, you might deprive future generations of the benefits of having use for that resource in that context.
And so the manner in which we deal with that is through leasing.
Yes. So the Queen's Chain has attracted and has always attracted interest from private entities for many reasons. One being that it adjoins freehold. It's also adjoins the foreshore or the beach, and so businessmen, developers would have always expressed interest in using the Queen's Chain as part of the development of their business product. And so they make applications to the state to use the Queen's Chain for their business endeavors.
Can private citizens also make that application?
Yes. There are quite a few St. Lucians who have.
Is it for business purposes? Explain to us in what settings.
Okay, so it depending on the location of the freehold property, you may find that.
And just for a pause, huh? Because there are some technical jargon and we want everyone to be able to be in on the conversation.
Okay.
So when we speak about freehold property, we're referring to?
Okay, so freehold property is property that is in, that's not a lease. Right? So that's held in absolute title.
So belonging to an independent party?
Yes, but
independent from the state?
No, that also includes the state.
It includes the state
yes.
as well.
So if you own totally a parcel of land, then that title, you have freehold title over it. If you are just leasing the land, then that title is leasehold title. Right? So that both the state and private persons or private interests have freehold title to land.
Okay. So you're explaining to us in the settings that private citizens, St. Lucian nationals, would have leases.
Yes. So the Queen's Chain adjoins or abuts property on the inland, and those can be held in private ownership. Most of it are. In that case, whoever is the owner of the land that adjoins the Queen's Chain can apply to the state for a lease of the Queen's Chain, or for the portion of Queen's Chain that adjoins their property. And that can be for various uses. If the land is being used for residential purposes, then the Queen's Chain becomes just an extension of the residential use of the private property. Most interest is generated around properties that have touristic or commercial type value. And so that's where one finds the most hotel developments or hotel developers really are on the Queen's Chain or on property adjoining the Queen's Chain. So they would naturally apply to the state for the lease of those portions of Queen's Chain to help enhance their business product.
Okay. So, Karen, let's have you jump in here. Explain to us the different types of leases that the department would issue.
Well, the Crown Lands section is the section that is primarily responsible for the management of leases, and persons would normally go to the Crown Lands section and apply to lease a piece of land or a piece of Crown Lands, as the case might be. And the Crown Lands Department will go through the various processes to facilitate the lease arrangements. And of course, the lease arrangements will come with various conditions of lease. Just like you would get a deed of sale of a similar nature, you would have conditions set to that lease. So you'll find that the leases would, of course, have to have the blessings from Cabinet. So the Crown will, on behalf of the applicant, put in the necessary paperwork to facilitate whatever arrangement that is required for the type of activity that is being requested from that lease arrangement.
And we've heard a lot about the emphyteutic lease. I do hope I'm pronouncing it correctly.
Yeah, emphyteutic lease.
Yes. So can you explain to us what that is?
Okay.
Go ahead.
Yeah. So emphyteutic lease is a lease that has a term anywhere from 9 years up to 99 years, where the lessee is given, that is the person who's requesting the lease, has the he has the benefit of improving the lands that he's leasing. That is, he can construct, he can develop the lands and remain in there for the period of time that that the lease is for. It also means that he can alienate, and I'm going to describe what that means, the land during that period. It means that he's practically the owner of the land for that period of time. He can actually sell it or further lease it once that's contained within the ambit of the term of the lease.
You saying sell or sublease?
Yes, he can sublet or sublease, or he can actually sell the property, or we call it assign it to someone else. But it's all on the condition that it is good, that arrangement would last until the term of the lease. So if it's a
so another individual will acquire the lease and the conditions
yes.
of the lease.
Yes. Okay. One of the characteristics or one of the elements of emphyteutis is that any improvements that's done to the property that is leased becomes it's transferred to the original owner at the end of the lease.
And that would be the state?
That would be the state, yes. And so the lessee has an obligation to maintain in good condition any improvement, any construction that's done on that property until the term.
Okay, we'll talk about how the state enforces conditions that are given along with those leases. Stay with us. We'll be back right after this.
She's been watching, waiting, wondering when the sands of time will give way to a tide of change, and for yesterday and today to become a new tomorrow. For a time when her sun can kiss the cheeks of your loved one, and her stars can twinkle in her honeymoon skies. When her earthly embrace will reassure and calm your soul. And her unique view can change your whole perspective. Proudly, she has risen to meet new challenges and to provide safe harbor to all who reach her shores. For her hopes and dreams still stand, shoulder to shoulder, a precious reminder of experiences yet to come. So, wherever your moments and memories take you, let her sense of adventure set you free. She is Saint Lucia. Let her inspire you.
And welcome back to our discussion with the Department of Physical Planning. We're discussing all matters pertaining to the Queen's Chain. Before we went to break, the Deputy Permanent Secretary in the department, Hildreth Lewis, was telling us about the conditions attached to the leases that developers and persons who have applied for leases of the Queen's Chain, the conditions that are attached to those leases.
Okay, so the conditions of leases can vary widely depending on the specific circumstances or the nature of the land that is being leased, and whether or not, and that includes whether or not there's public interest in accessing resources beyond in the case of a Queen's Chain, beyond the Queen's Chain, and that would be the sea or the beach. In most cases, Queen's Chain that adjoins the beach normally would have a requirement that requires the developer or the lessee to provide public access to the beach. The reason being that the Queen's Chain is the parcel of land between the freehold or the developer's land and the beach. And so unless there is a registered public right-of-way to the beach, and that would most times require to pass over the developer's land and over the Queen's Chain. Unless that is established, as in that exists and registered at the land registry, then we would make the recommendations to the cabinet that the public access should be part of the conditions for when considering a lease of the Queen's Chain. That is normally reinforced when the Development Control Authority is also considering an application by the developer for their development, as the physical aspect of the development. So that's where we are. We make the recommendations to the cabinet, and the cabinet mostly does go with our recommendations and make the condition for public access.
For the public access.
Yes.
What is the process for an applicant, Karen, wanting to apply for these leases? Walk us through what that process is.
Well, the first thing they would have to do is visit the Crown Lands section, and they would obtain the necessary information that is required to submit the application. So Crown Lands will guide you as to all the requirements for an application of that nature, and after careful consideration of the request, they will advise as to what is the best approach towards getting use of that Queen's Chain lease. And from there, they would then take the matter to the next stage, which is to the cabinet for consideration. Once that is done, then the applicant will receive a response as to the conditions of that lease, and of course it will be registered, and necessary legal documentation to enforce it will be provided.
So what do we do in cases where there is no right of way that is registered? How do we deal with such situations?
Well, as Mr. Lewis was saying, we our maps, the maps that are stored at, within our registry, will indicate which parcels of land are encumbered by a right of way. As the state, we can make conditions as to accesses across parcels of land, and that will be again registered on the necessary maps and in the necessary land registry information. So once the process has been finalized, everything becomes tied up with the legal documentation and the registration of that documentation to make it happen, or to facilitate any accesses that are necessary at the time.
Okay. So how now do we deal with the public access?
So public access can be quite can be a sticky situation at times, and the reason being that if there isn't a registered right of way through the Queen's Chain or through the private lands before the Queen's Chain, then the owner of that private lands can assert their rights as landowner, and probably prevent persons from accessing the Queen's Chain and the beach.
So I can put up my private property sign, I can say no access here, and
Yeah.
I will be well within my right.
Yes. The state has many avenues at its disposal to deal with that. One being that it can use compulsory acquisition of land to cause an access over private land through the Queen's Chain and to the beach area. Or there is the concept that no land can be landlocked, no parcel of land can be landlocked, but then that needs to be taken to the courts for adjudication. The avenue that the state uses most frequently is to require public access to the beach as a condition for leasing the land to a developer. So it's a case of, you want something from me, I need something from you. And so, you know, that's why earlier I indicated that as part of the application process and the recommendations that we make to Cabinet, whenever lands or Queen's Chain is being requested for leasing, especially where that Queen's Chainer joins a beach. That is, we make that recommendation to Cabinet that a condition for public access be put in there if there isn't a public right-of-way registered. And so that by far is the easiest mechanism that exists in the state's arsenal to deal with the problem.
We've heard a lot about the beaches being very public. Are all beaches in St. Lucia public? Do we have any situations where we have private beaches?
Okay. Interesting question. So generally the concept is that all beaches are public. And that is underpinned by the fact that the seabed is the domain of the state or the Crown, and the foreshore, which is the part upon which the beach is found, is kind of part of the seabed. So this is, by virtue of that, all beaches are public. However, there are some instances where a beach can become private, and there may be an instance or two that situation exists in St. Lucia. One is where it has to do with when lands are surveyed, the boundaries, the cadastral boundaries are generally considered to be general boundaries. That is, there is a level of movement that is allowed over a period of time. But there is a concept of boundaries in the land registry framework that is called fixing of boundaries.
Yeah.
And so if a boundary is fixed as per the procedure in the Land Registration Act, then that boundary cannot change or will not change no matter the circumstances. If a parcel of land near the coastline for some reason becomes through erosion or wave action or storm action, if a parcel of land, if the sea has entered into a parcel of land that is private, for which the boundaries are fixed in accordance with the Land Registration Act provisions, then it would mean that that portion of the boundaries that is under water would still remain the domain of the private entity. And if a beach is formed in that situation, then that would be a private beach.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So, Karen, the idea now about the coastal management, because of what Mr. Lewis is describing, it would seem that given climate change, we may be seeing more of that happening in St. Lucia not too long from now. Mm. So in terms of the coastal management, where does the department fall in that?
Well, we do take into consideration the various uses that take place on our coastlands. In addition to developers seeking to develop it for touristic uses, you still do have recreational uses that the coastland is used for. You still also have fishermen that also use the near shore for fishing activities. So there's so many uses for which the coastal areas have opportunities that it can become a management activity to manage the various activities that are competing for the limited space that is actually usable space. Over the years, you would find that those uses have evolved based on our demands as a state. So sometimes you find that the touristic activities may seem more demanding than others. In recent times, though, we have been having other uses that are competing. People want the beach for recreational purposes. Of late, we've been having persons seeking to use it for things like sea moss farming. So the uses have been, there have been various uses that have been competing for those, for that scarce resource. In addition, you find that mangroves and other biodiversity life is in demand for that same space. So you find over the years, as a department, we try to put some management mechanisms in place so that the various users can still have access to the resource with as much control as possible.
All right. We'll take our next break here, but when we come back, we follow up from where you just left off there, Karen. We're talking about the management of the resource now, because you've indicated that there are competing interests for something that is very finite. So we want to be able to discuss that in full detail on the other side of the break. Stay with us.
Better yet, use soap and water.
We must protect each other if we are to beat this corona.
Together let us win this war. Be a soldier for St. Lucia. Together let us win this war. Be a soldier, together we can beat this corona.
So you don't become the next case. Avoid touching your face. I'm sure you've been told so. Handshakes and hugging are up. No, no.
Advice give you the please. Cover your mouth and your nose if you cough or sneeze.
Practice social distancing and avoid large social gatherings.
Together let us win this war. Be a soldier for St. Lucia. Together let us win this war. St. Lucia, be a soldier. Together we can beat this corona.
For further information, please contact the hotline at 311 or the Bureau of Health Education at 468-5349.
Thank you so much for staying with us. We're here with the Deputy Permanent Secretary in the Department of Physical Planning, Hildreth Lewis, as well as the Chief Physical Planning Officer, Karen Augustine, and we're discussing all matters related to the Queen's Chain. Before we went to break, Karen, you were making the point about the competing interest for whatever as our finite resource, our land. What is the department doing about how that management takes place?
Well, we first try to engage all the stakeholders, the parties that have interest in the resource, and have various discussions with them, outlining what the issues and their interests, where these two come to play. And in so doing, come up with a mechanism as to how the resource can be used, and guidelines by which everybody have to be exposed to and be guided by, so as to ensure the continued safe use of the resource without exploitation or abuse by the persons that are using it. You will appreciate that sometimes some of those conditions can be very difficult for some persons to swallow when they have to understand the terms and conditions of using the resource. Persons have expressed dissatisfaction as a result of the limitations to this resource and the conditions under which they are able to use it. But as with anything else, we have to strike a balance as part of management or as managing the resource, so that everybody can be equitably represented, and persons can appreciate the resource now and for the future.
So explain to us now, because there are delicate parts of our land resource that is a given. How does the department make the decision as to an applicant's use for delicate aspects of our lands?
Well, once a project has been presented to the department, we examine what exactly the project would present in a situation, as well as the stakeholders that will be impacted by that project. And of course, as I said, persons will have to strike a balance to ensure fair and equitable use of the resource. So we put conditions to development to ensure that the person that is undertaking that development can enjoy that development, as well as persons that are going to be impacted by the development will also be able to appreciate what the development contributes to the community. So it is always a balancing act when we look at projects, especially projects that have large expanses of land, and of course can result in very impactful impacts on the environment, on the community. So we have to always try to examine how each one of those factors have to come into play, so that you can strike a balance with all the various interests that are being presented in the project.
Mr. Lewis, you wanted to add on?
Well, yes, just to add to Karen's point on the matter. So there is the within the planning framework, the concept of forward planning. That is, really looking at on a national level first, and then breaking down to sectoral or territorial levels, how the resources can be planned to be most beneficial to everybody, right? That process is an ongoing process. It is sometimes fraught with with setbacks, because really planning is about trying to strike a balance, like Ms. Augustine was saying, with a number of competing interests. And you would appreciate that St. Lucia's 240 square miles is very limited and finite in the resources that it has. And we do have to accommodate the existing or the demands that the society places on those resources now, but also make provisions for the generations to come. Right? So, like Ms. Augustine was saying, when you have large projects that are being proposed, the Development Control Authority as the entity that has the legal mandate to look at those proposals and make a determination. The legislation that governs that entity also makes provision for the carrying out of studies that would allow the decision makers.
So we look at those impact assessments.
Yes, environmental and social impact assessment. And that would, if it's done properly, would look at the scale of a project being proposed and examine its likely impact on the immediate area for the proposed project, but also its vicinity. And that's currently this is what we rely on mostly for to guide the management process. But it is a work in progress. It is there are a lot of competing interests that sometimes cannot always be satisfied in a manner that everyone would wish.
Are there instances where you have to say no to developers?
Yes, there have been a number of instances when, depending on the nature of what is being proposed, in the location that is being proposed, it is adjudged that it would be too impactful negatively on the environment, and once it's going to be impact negatively on the environment, it's going to have repercussions socioeconomically. So yes.
Let me just say thank you so much for the discussion on our Facebook platform. We know the questions are coming through. Thank you for that. And you continue to post them, and I will post them to our two guests on the panel. Now, I want to start off with this question coming in. Can the Queen's Chain Reserve be leased to a person or entity when one such person, even when the person or the entity does not have the title or leasehold to any adjoining inland?
Yes. So the answer is yes. However, I must add that it is a policy that the lands adjoining the Queen's Chain, or the owner of lands adjoining the Queen's Chain, is given at first consideration for the use of the Queen's Chain before another party. However, the prerogative for leasing the Queen's Chain resides with the cabinet, and so it is not, the cabinet is not bound to lease the Queen's Chain solely to the person who, or the owner who adjoins, the landowner who adjoins the Queen's Chain. And so we have some instances, yes, where parties or lessees to the Queen's Chain do not own land adjoining the Queen's Chain.
Okay. We have another question coming in here for Ms. Augustine. Please describe the stakeholder consultation activities that took place prior to granting approval to the 300+ acre Cabot Point project in Point Hardy, including general timelines, if possible, and which stakeholders were included in that consultation.
Well, the project at hand is a project that is currently before the Development Control Authority. It's an ongoing project. And since it's a project that is currently being considered, it's sometimes a little bit premature to make a definitive statement on the process so as not to prejudice it. I would prefer if I can speak generally to the processes, but where it comes to a particular project that is a current project, it's a little difficult to speak to at this time.
So what would be that consultation process for any development? One of a very large scale where you would find multiple impacts, whether it be cultural, social, economic.
Generally, when you have projects that are large projects that fall within our legislation where environmental impacts are a requirement, the applicant or the developer has to go through the process of preparing what is called an environmental and social impact assessment. We ask those projects to undertake a particular process so as to derive at that impact assessment. So you would find that the applicant, after submitting the proposal, would be provided with a terms of reference based on the project that they are seeking to undertake. We generate the terms of reference from responses from various other government agencies and stakeholder agencies. They would speak to the nature of the project and their concerns. We would compile all those responses, and then the developer will submit, or the developer will indicate to us the consultants that will undertake that environmental impact assessment. This would be presented to the board of the Development Control Authority for consideration, and the impact assessment will speak to the various mitigative plans that the developer will employ in undertaking the development. So that is, in a very tight nutshell, what the process is. But as I said earlier on, active projects are not projects that I can speak directly to at this time.
Okay. And with the impact assessments, how are you independently verify what those findings are? Explain to us how that is done.
Okay, so the applicant will engage a consultant to undertake the preparation of the environmental impact assessment. The consultant would have had to have been first approved by the board of the Development Control Authority. This is to ensure that the consultant has the requisite skills to undertake a project of that nature in terms of the preparation of an environmental impact assessment. So we will take into consideration whether the consultant has both educational background, experience, etc., their previous works and what have you, to make a determination as to whether they are most suitable to undertake the preparation of the environmental impact assessment. Once that has been submitted, technical staff of the department will review the submission to ensure that the concerns and the impacts that have been presented by the project are adequately covered in the various plans and submissions that the EIA seeks to present. This is a process that usually takes quite a bit of time, as you can well imagine. Several stakeholders are involved, and it takes a long process to go through the various submissions. So you will result in various iterations of the project so as to get to a stage that is suitable or that is capable of addressing the problems or the potential impacts the project can present.
Now, can developers go ahead and do any works on the lands that they've had application for before the board? Before your impact assessments come in, the reports come in, are the developers allowed to do anything on the lands?
Well, as I said earlier on, projects come in various stages. So you may have, depending on the extent of the project, an applicant can submit various applications for a project. And so a project can be undertaken in various stages. Not every stage may require the outcomes of an impact assessment. It depends on the nature of the project and what the applicant is seeking to do. So depends on what the project is and what the applicant wants to do at whatever stage, then we will consider that request. So it doesn't necessarily have to fall or the applicant doesn't necessarily have to have an EIA first for every component of a project.
And for the EIAs, do we have a time frame on them? When are they supposed to be conducted? Does your department oversee that?
I'm a little confused. When are they supposed to be conducted?
Yeah, so is someone allowed to submit an EIA that would have been done years before that application ever came through to the department? Or do they submit an application and then go ahead and do the EIA? What is that process?
The first step is always to submit the application. And the department will advise as to the best course of action after the application has been submitted. So if it is a large project with various components and various phases, we at the department will determine what is the best process or the best way forward in executing that project. Again, depends on the project, the components of the project, the amount of land involved, the impacts that we foresee that a project can present. There are lots of variables where projects are concerned. And so we have to examine each one of those variables in making a determination as to the next steps for a project.
You want to chime in?
Yes, just to add in. An environmental and social impact assessment is kind of project specific. The reason being, if a developer comes with a 300 room, a proposal for a 300 room hotel, and another one with 250 room hotel. While those two are hotels, there are some nuanced differences between the two can make major differences in the impacts that it can have on a particular site and the community. So, for example, a straight situation would be calculating the volume of waste, including sewage, that is likely to be produced by a hotel of a particular size, and that's probably a function of the number of rooms, and they look at occupancy and all of that. But that's going to determine the size of the sewage treatment plant, and the volumes of waste that will have to be dealt with. But it's not just that, because that can have immediate impact on your environment if it's not dealt with, or on your services, as in if you have a sewage network in the proximity, whether. So there are a lot of things that have to be considered. Now, so you look at that in the immediacy, as in what's before you. Come 5 years down the line, it's quite possible that the same 300 and 250 room hotels can have additional impacts that were not in play 5 years ago. As in, again, whether your systems, whether they've been upgraded, or whether they've reached their capacity, that new forms of or new systems have to be looked at or recommended for the developer to ensure that the impacts are mitigated. And for sure, new technologies would have come into play, new materials, and these need to be dealt with to the day. So I heard your question earlier in terms of the timing. It is, we don't believe that an EIA of 5 years ago would necessarily fit the bill for a project being undertaken now. And that being said, it means that the project needs to be reassessed for under today's conditions to give some level of comfort that we are actually taking on the issues that are relevant today.
But we're leaving that entirely up to the developer to do.
No, it's not. No.
So the undertaking of the economic, social impacts.
Yes.
That's the domain of the developer. The developer to present that assessment report to you.
Yes. However, what is called the terms of reference, that is the issues that need to be addressed or need to be studied.
Is handed over by the department.
Yes.
But
or
how?
By the DCA.
By the DCA. Mm-hmm. How does the DCA then, if you will, review, assess, vet what is being presented?
Mm-hmm. Well,
how can we, as St. Lucians, be assured that the reports coming in, those assessments coming in, are in fact what they say they are? Because the ordinary person would assume that if a developer is putting millions of dollars into a project, he wants to continue with that project and would not submit reports that may not put that project in good light. So how are we guarding ourselves against that?
Well, the DCA is not a standalone agency. We look at the assessments that are submitted together with other government agencies. It's a collaborative effort from the various government agency stakeholders. So we would review those projects based on consultation with those other agencies, because each project, as was originally indicated, has its own challenges, right? And we at the department rely on the expertise presented by other agencies as well. So with that, we are able to better monitor a situation where the EIA is concerned, or even the plans presented by the EIA.
Okay. Stay with us. The conversation continues on the other side of the break.
Overnight, growing national unrest.
Society, a digital cashless society, one world currency.
A vaccine for COVID-19.
Drop a
COVID virus.
Macy's iconic flagship.
The coronavirus.
Everybody vaccinated on the pandemic.
Opposition to the lockdown.
Infected conspiracy theories.
Bizarre 5G.
The truth about the origin of COVID-19 hidden from the rest of the world. And the Chinese.
In this constantly changing environment, resulting in sensory overload, cut through the noise and tune in to the National Television Network, the official source of information, all facts.
And welcome back to our discussion with Hildreth Lewis, the Deputy Permanent Secretary in the Department of Physical Planning, and Karen Augustine, who's the Chief Physical Planning Officer. Before we went to break, we made mention of referral agencies. Can you give us a list of the agencies and in terms of how the Department of DCA interacts with these referral agencies?
Well, the agencies depend on the project. So if we have a particular project based on the issues presented by the project, we will identify the relevant referral agencies to which we will refer the project to. So not all agencies would get all projects. It's only if it is that agency presents the relevant skills or the relevant expertise within that agency to assess that particular project. So if a project has something where, for example, you may have a coastal piece of infrastructure, you know, somebody may want to put up a groin, for example, we may seek the intervention of Ministry of Infrastructure. So it depends on the project at hand. We will get the relevant agencies involved. So not every agency would be involved in every project. So the project is examined, and then based on the issues it presents, the relevant agency will be contacted to provide input on the terms of reference as well as the review of the environmental impact assessment, whatever the case might be.
So we have quasi-state agencies like the St. Lucia National Trust, the National Conservation Authority, you have the Archaeological Society, the relationship between the department and these agencies.
Well, as I said, if the department feels that a project requires input of a particular agency, we will refer the matter to them for comments and their review. And we take those on board when we are preparing the terms of reference as well as in the review of the environmental impact assessment.
Now, earlier when we spoke about the stakeholders, and that could mean varying parties, Does the department engage stakeholders, or is that left solely on to developers? Do the developers engage stakeholders as well?
Well, again, too, it depends on the project. The department will engage the various agencies that it deems necessary for a project. The department, based on the EIA and through the consultant, will also engage stakeholders, because the consultant is responsible for undertaking various consultations with the relevant agencies, so as to compile the necessary documentation and information to generate the environmental impact assessment document. So it is from both ends, the department as well as the developer through his consultants.
Okay. We have another question coming in from the Facebook platform. What is the current status of the leasehold on the Queen's Chain in the Peto Management Area at Sugar Beach Resort and at the former Le Paradis Resort?
The current status of the leasehold?
The leasehold.
Well, at Sugar Beach does have, I would believe, an emphatic lease. So it's a very long lease, which they would have over the years passed on to various persons who have bought properties from the estate. And so that is a matter of continuing in existence until the end of the lease. As Mr. Lewis had indicated earlier, even the developer has the option of selling lands with the conditions as attached to the leasehold. So, as attached to the lease. So it is a matter of it being in continuance until the end of the lease period. And it will apply for any lease, not just in the PMA, but anywhere that a lease is a condition for that development.
We have another question coming in. Is access to the Queen's Chain restricted to vehicular traffic? That's one. And does the developer have to provide full access to the beach? Like in the case of the Ansel Avoyne in Choiseul, where there was, like in the case of Ansel Avoyne in Choiseul, just lost the, I'll find that part again, but go ahead and answer the vehicular traffic. Is it restricted to vehicular traffic? And does the developer have to provide full access to the beach? When I scroll through.
As Mr. Lewis indicated, there are rights of ways that have been registered and are recorded on the land register. So the right of way will indicate whether it is a pedestrian right of way or a vehicular right of way that is on that parcel of land. So if it is vehicular, it will be recorded or it will be registered as a vehicular right of way. Likewise, a pedestrian right of way. A developer that is encumbered by that right of way will have to, of course, develop it knowing or being cognizant of the fact that there is an encumbrance of that nature on that parcel of land. And so the development would have to take into consideration or would have to incorporate that right. All right? So it all depends on what has been registered for access across that parcel of land.
Okay. Another question coming in here, and the individual wants to know a moratorium on coastal development.
For where?
And what would, is the department ever considering, would it ever consider a moratorium?
We have in the past placed moratoriums on lands, and that is also including the Queen's Chain. It depends on what is the development trend at the time and what it is that we are trying to achieve with that piece of land. So a moratorium can be placed for a particular reason and for a particular period of time. Once that reason has been resolved or the time has elapsed, then the moratorium can be lifted. But it depends on what is going on in the society or what the situation is that would require a moratorium to be placed.
Someone else is asking, is this all part of the Constitution and legal, or the planning department makes the rules as the developer comes along? So do you have fixed regulations, policies in place, or do we just simply go by a case-by-case basis when we're dealing with applicants?
Well, where the DCA is concerned, we are guided by our legislation. We have what we call the Physical Plan and Development Act. That's the legislation that we use in reviewing all projects to the DCA. But you have to also keep in mind that each project is different, each project is unique, each project presents its own situation, its own proposals. So each project has to be considered based on the proposals it will present. And so the conditions of approval will speak to how best the project can be executed in a manner that is beneficial to the developer as well as the community at large.
Okay. When we look at what we have now, and we indicated earlier that finite resource, which is our land, the delicate parts of it, and so forth. Has the time come for us as a nation as a department leading the way, for us to have set guidelines as to how we are going to manage the Queen's Chain?
I do believe we are at this juncture. We've always been there, I think, but we have, in my opinion, maybe delayed in being clear as to putting in proper guidelines for the Queen's Chain. We recognize that over the years, the interests in the Queen's Chain are growing. And so the time has come for something definite to be done where it comes to putting a policy to guide the management of land in that regard. So I do agree that it is time for us to visit the situation and to place some clear guidelines so that all of us can benefit from this finite resource. And we can also have it for future generations. We all want to ensure that we can have a quality of life that the Queen's Chain has can afford for all of us to enjoy.
Deputy Via?
So, yes. So, added to what Karen has just said, yes, I think it's way past time. One of the instruments that need to be used to help us implement our finite resources would be a national land use plan with the attendant policies. And so we have been trying to get or mobilize that type of activity. It is quite a major undertaking, both in terms of human resources but also financial. So I recognize that we've had some difficulty meeting that need, but it is really it's really important that we give the necessary attention to an undertaking like that. and it would help us get a better appreciation of the state of our space, our physical space, and allow through the studies and the interaction and the comments of the experts and landholders, allow us to come to reach a consensus on how to apportion land and the use of land for our current needs, but also for the future generation.
Right. Is there any, because we talk about the developers applying for the lease of the Queen's Train, you've spoken about the development that it will remain as sort of ownership of the states. Is there any development that the state would not allow a leasing to do on land, on the Queen's Train?
Well, I think if it's something that is going to impact national security, or even have impacts such as pollution of the environment, the state might want to disallow a project that is going to result in any kind of unmitigated pollution. And so I think there are instances where projects of that nature can come to our attention. I don't know of any that have arisen, but that does not mean that it's not something that cannot be presented. But I don't think that the state would be, or currently has, the necessary mechanisms in place to mitigate projects that can be environmentally damning.
Okay. Yeah, well, just to add, any project that's likely to have really adverse social impacts or cause social upheaval in a protracted way would most probably cause the state to think twice about allowing it. And so that social impact or social upheaval can come about through what Mr. Augustine was saying. If the environment is going to be so impacted, or if it is determined that there is a national security threat in there, then yeah, I could easily see, or I could see that the state could easily make a determination that it would not encourage that such.
What is the framework in place to deal with developers who may be flouting the regulations or who may go contrary to the conditions in the lease?
Okay, so leases the conditions of the lease are actually enshrined in the document, in the lease document that is signed by the lessee, as in the person who's leasing, and the lessor, the state. So once it is determined that the lessee is in violation of a condition of the lease, then it's quite probable that the lease document would have would indicate what would be the repercussions for breaches of the conditions, right? And that would be the guiding document or the guidance that the Attorney General's chambers would use to in trying to settle the matter. However, if it is a case where those conditions may have been part of the approval given by the Development Control Authority, then it means that there is another avenue that the state or a state body can use to make the developer comply, or that the developer might risk getting his approval revoked.
Okay. As we wind down, the final question coming from me. We heard very early on from Prime Minister Honorable Alan Chastney that perhaps the best way to go moving forward would be for the DCA to be divorced, really, and get more autonomy. And I can see Karen sort of nodding there. Do you believe that if we were to go that route, that we will have more of a sort of firm hold on development in St. Lucia, the use of the Queen's Chain and management of our land resource?
Well, currently the DCA is a statutory body that operates underneath the Department of Physical Planning. The direction that the Prime Minister is seeking to present is that the DCA will be independent of the department. And so the department's thrust now will be that of forward planning. So the department now will be in a position to look at the issues of the Queen's Chain, as you rightly pointed out, and give it more focus and give it more attention, as well as all the other plans that have been struggling for the past years. So in that way, the matters of forward planning can be strengthened. The policies for Queen's Chain, for land development on a whole, can be further strengthened in having the two agencies operate independently.
All right, some final words there from you, Mr. Hildreth Lewis.
Okay, so I just would like to say that St. Lucians, fellow St. Lucians, need to acquaint themselves with the literature that govern the space within which they live. So there's a bit to read about the Queen's Chain. It is enshrined in the Civil Code. There's some other document that's annexed to the Constitution. I think we need to know the framework that govern our existence in St. Lucia, and so we would, once we do that, we would be better able to make the right contributions as the putting on questions, and probably do the right amount of lobbying for the advancements that we see are necessary for our future.
So civic participation. Yeah. I want to thank you so much, the Deputy Permanent Secretary in the Department of Physical Planning, Hildreth Lewis, and the Chief Physical Planning Officer, Karen Augustine, for being our guests to discuss the Queen's Chain and all of the issues in there. We did touch on coastal management, we touched on climate change, sea level rise, beach erosion, how that is affecting the Queen's Chain. And so lots there to pull apart, and we do hope that you can go back to the Facebook platform as well as YouTube and go through the discussion again, so that you can get a better understanding of the work of the department and St. Lucia, how we're moving forward with our Queen's Chain and its management. I am Lisa Joseph. On behalf of the entire team here, I want to say thank you so much. See you next time.